Welcome back. This is the third section in our course, and we're focusing on administration and configuration. Once you have your first instance created, there's a set of initial configurations you need to make. Let's start with those. Let's start by going to our existing instance. Navigate to Settings, Administration. Let's start here with the System Settings. You get a pop-up screen with several tabs for configuration. Some of the items we have to focus on as part of the initial configuration include items on the General tab and the Formats tab. Let's start from the General tab settings. The platform has added Form Autosave several versions ago. You can disable this feature here in the Select the Default Save option in Forms. The default setting is enabled. For the most part, this is okay to leave as is, but there could be special circumstances that requires you to disable these settings. Next, if you are using Skype for Business in the organization, you can enable presence on the platform. If you're not using it, then don't worry about the setting. Following that, you can define the format in which the names are displayed. You have several options here, with the default being first name followed by last name. For North America, this is how typically the names are displayed. Next, currency precision is defined by default at 2 decimals. As far as I know, this is typical across the globe. The following setting refers to how record sharing behaves. This is important to configure from the get-go, as it allows you to control whether when reassigning a record, the existing owner keeps a reference to the record as shared. The blocked file extension defines which file formats cannot be associated to records in your instance. This is somewhat irrelevant if you're going to do all your document management leveraging the integration to SharePoint. For the most part, when displaying currencies, you want the currency symbol displayed. Here, you can change that to display the currency code instead. On the next option, you can configure your instance to leverage additional Azure features around relevant search. This is an important configuration, as relevant search provides results in a much more structured manner like a regular internet search. The downside of this is that your configured entities that participate in the relevant search feature send data from your environment to Azure for further analysis. The Bing Map section allows you to display a location map based on the record's address. This is disabled by default. Some of the following settings are quite self-explanatory. Items like phone prefix and telephony provider are good examples. One setting I usually disable right off the bat is whether users see the add download message. Typically on a new deployment, the app is not immediately introduced. Also, a little further down, the welcome screen is another one I tend to disable immediately. When deploying a custom help module, you have the configuration options right here to point to that location. The default app name is another one I typically see configured right at the beginning. The default Dynamics 365-custom is not the most expressive name. Typically, this would get renamed to the cute name you give your application. Finally, the remaining settings typically stay default, but you can configure various timeouts if needed. Moving on to the Formats tab, we can configure our locale-specific settings. You can select from default locales for countries or build your own custom format. Next, on the Auditing tab, you can enable and configure what needs to be audited on the platform. A note here to remember is the fact that the more you audit, the longer your audit logs become and the more performance impact you will have. I typically recommend the auditing this way only the minimum necessary. If you require extensive auditing, you could build or look for a custom auditing solution that can be configured to capture more extensive details and store in a location that's easy to report on. The Email tab allows you to configure how email is processed. The default value here is server-side synchronization, and you should try to use this going forward. One important aspect to look at is down in the Configure folder level tracking and email correlation. Here you can change the default CRN column token to something more relevant for your deployment if you want to. Other tabs you should browse through and look at the options include the Outlook tab, which allows you to configure how Outlook integration behaves if you're using this feature, as well as the Synchronization tab, which collects a set of settings around how Outlook-specific artifacts like appointments, contacts, and tasks are synchronized. Let's close the system settings and look at other available initial settings. Back on the administration page, another initial setting we should be aware of is the auto-numbering. Here you have some basic capabilities on configuring auto-generated numbers for contracts, cases, quotes, orders, invoices, campaigns, and a few more records. Finally, in the administration area, when configuring a multilingual system, you must configure languages. Here, you can add from the available languages by simply selecting one or more options from the list of languages and clicking Apply. Note that this only adds translations for the default out-of-the-box fields, and you should still review those to make sure they are relevant for the specific industry served by the platform. All custom fields will need custom translations. Next, while not a mandatory initial setting, it is worth mentioning for those that spin up trial instances for various mockups. You can have a minimal set of sample data installed by going to Settings, Data Management, Sample Data. In the pop-up, choose to install if you're going to use it. You can easily remove it from the same location later on. Next, let's move on to Settings, Business Management area. Here, you should set from the beginning the fiscal year settings. At the minimum, you should define the start of your fiscal year. Finally, if catering across multiple countries and you want to add multiple currencies, you can do so from the Currencies area. Here, you can add or remove currencies as well as define the conversion rate between the newly added currencies and the base currency. Note that there is no automated way out of the box to update currency conversion rates. You could build a solution for that or find a third-party module that does it for you. If adding third-party solutions, make sure they are provided by a reputable ISV. And this covers the initial configurations required to get going.